January 24, 1848. A carpenter named James Marshall is inspecting a sawmill he's building on the American River in Coloma, California. He notices something glinting in the water. He bends down, picks it up, and examines a small yellowish rock. It's gold. In that moment, everything changed. Within a year, over 100,000 people would flood into California from around the world. Towns would appear overnight. Fortunes would be made and lost. Violence would erupt. The environment would be devastated, and California would transform from a sleepy Mexican territory with 15,000 people into the 31st state of the United States. The California Gold Rush wasn't just a migration. It wasn't just an economic event. It was a frenzy that revealed something fundamental about human nature. When you dangle the possibility of instant wealth in front of people, all rationality disappears. This is the story of the Gold Rush. It's about greed, hope, suffering, and the birth of modern California. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people who rushed to California looking for gold ended up broke, broken, or dead. But that didn't stop them from trying. Before we talk about the rush itself, you need to understand what California was like before gold was discovered. In 1848, California belonged to Mexico. It had just been ceded to the United States through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, ending the Mexican-American War, but the ink was barely dry on that treaty when Marshall found his gold nugget. California was remote, sparsely populated, and considered a backwater. The population was maybe 15,000 people, mostly Native Americans, with some Mexican settlers and a handful of American immigrants. San Francisco was a tiny village called Yerba Buena, with a few hundred residents. There was no railroad connecting California to the rest of the United States. No telegraph lines. Getting to California from the East Coast meant either a dangerous 6-month overland journey or a 6-month sea voyage around the tip of South America. It was the edge of the known world for most Americans. James Marshall was working for John Sutter, a Swiss immigrant who'd built a fort and established a small agricultural empire in the Sacramento Valley. Sutter's fort was one of the few significant settlements in the region. When Marshall found gold, he tried to keep it quiet. He and Sutter both understood that if word got out, it would destroy everything they'd built. Workers would abandon their jobs. Squatters would invade their land. Chaos would ensue. They were absolutely right. Despite their efforts at secrecy, word leaked out. A merchant named Sam Brannan is often credited with triggering the rush. In May 1848, he walked through San Francisco holding up a vial of gold dust and shouting, "Gold! Gold! Gold from the American River!" Brannan wasn't stupid. Before making his announcement, he'd bought up every pickaxe, pan, and shovel in the region. When the rush started, he sold those tools at massive markups. He became one of California's first millionaires without ever mining an ounce of gold himself. This is a pattern we'll see repeated. The people who got rich during the gold rush usually weren't the miners. They were the people selling to the miners. By the summer of 1848, California was emptying out. Not of people arriving, but of people leaving their jobs and abandoning their responsibilities to search for gold ships sat in San Francisco harbor with no crews because the sailors had all deserted to the goldfields. Stores closed, farms were abandoned. Soldiers deserted their posts. The fever had begun, but this was still just California. The rest of the world didn't know yet. That changed in December 1848 when President James K. Polk confirmed the gold discovery in his State of the Union address. He displayed a sample of California gold before Congress. This was the official confirmation the world had been waiting for. The news spread like wildfire. Newspapers across America and Europe ran sensational stories about rivers flowing with gold, about men picking up fortunes from streambeds, about instant wealth available to anyone willing to make the journey. The stories were wildly exaggerated, but people believed them. Or rather, people wanted to believe them. This is the psychology of every gold rush, every bubble, every mania in history. When everyone around you is talking about fortunes being made, staying home feels like missing out on the opportunity of a lifetime. The fear of missing out is more powerful than the fear of failure. 1849 was the year the world went mad for California gold. That's why the migrants that year are called the 49ers. Over 90,000 people arrived in California in 1849 alone. By 1855, over 300,000 people had made the journey. These weren't just Americans. They came from Mexico, South America, China, Europe, Australia. It was one of the largest mass migrations in human history. But getting to California was the first challenge, and for many it would be fatal. There were three main routes to California, and all of them were terrible. The first was the overland route across the continent. This meant a 2,000-mile journey through prairies, deserts, and mountains. It took 5 to 6 months under good conditions. Under bad conditions, you died. Travelers formed wagon trains for protection and pooled resources. They left in the spring so they could cross the Sierra Nevada mountains before winter snow made the passes impassable. They learned this lesson from the Donner Party, who'd been trapped by early snow in 1846 and resorted to cannibalism to survive. The overland route was brutal. Cholera outbreaks swept through wagon trains, killing thousands. Water was scarce, the heat was unbearable. Oxen died, forcing travelers to abandon their belongings. Native American tribes, whose lands were being invaded, sometimes attacked the wagon trains. Graves lined the trails. The estimate is that 1 in 17 people who attempted the overland route died along the way. The second route was by sea around Cape Horn at the southern tip of South America. This was a 14,000-mile voyage that took 5 to 8 months. Ships were overcrowded, disease-ridden, and sometimes simply unseaworthy. The passage around Cape Horn was notoriously dangerous. The weather was violent. Ships were battered by storms. Some sank. Those that made it still faced months of terrible food, cramped conditions, and the constant threat of disease. But if you had money and wanted to avoid the overland dangers, this was your option. The third route was a combination. Sail to Panama, cross the Isthmus of Panama overland, then catch another ship to California. This was faster, only 2 to 3 months total, but it came with its own horrors. The Panama crossing meant hacking through dense jungle in brutal heat. Yellow fever and malaria killed thousands. And when you reached the Pacific side, there often weren't enough ships waiting. People were stranded for weeks or months in disease-infested camps. Think about what this tells you about the gold rush mentality. People were willing to risk death, spend their life savings, abandon their families, and endure months of suffering for the chance, not the guarantee, but just the chance of finding gold. And most of them would fail. When the 49ers finally arrived in California, they found a chaotic, lawless, violent place that bore no resemblance to the paradise they'd been promised. San Francisco had exploded from a few hundred people to tens of thousands in a single year. There wasn't enough housing, so people lived in tents. There weren't enough supplies, so prices were astronomical. A single egg could cost $1, equivalent to about $30 today. The city was a muddy, filthy disaster. Ships were abandoned in the harbor, their crews gone to the goldfields. Some ships were dragged ashore and converted into stores and hotels. The city burned down multiple times because everything was built hastily from wood and canvas. But San Francisco was civilized compared to the mining camps. The goldfields were spread across the Sierra Nevada foothills, in places with names like Hangtown, Rough and Ready, and Murderer's Bar. These weren't towns in any traditional sense. They were temporary camps where thousands of men lived in tents, worked from dawn to dusk, and had no law except what they created themselves. And gold mining was nothing like the stories promised. Early on, gold could be found in rivers and streams through a process called placer mining. You'd stand in freezing water for hours, scooping sediment into a pan and swirling it, hoping to see gold flakes settle at the bottom. It was backbreaking, tedious work. Most days you found nothing. Sometimes you'd find a few dollars worth of gold dust. Very rarely you'd find a nugget worth real money. And the easy gold disappeared fast. By 1850, the surface gold was mostly gone. Mining became more industrial. It required expensive equipment, significant capital, and coordinated labor. Individual prospectors were replaced by mining companies. The environmental destruction was staggering. Hydraulic mining, which used high-pressure water cannons to blast away hillsides, devastated the landscape. Entire mountains were washed away. Rivers were choked with sediment. Mercury, used to separate gold from ore, poisoned waterways. The destruction is still visible today. Parts of the Sierra Nevada look like lunar landscapes because of gold rush mining. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about the people and the society they created. The mining camps were almost entirely male. These were rough, violent places with no formal law enforcement. Disputes were settled by fists, knives, or guns. Vigilante justice was common. Hangings happened regularly, sometimes justified, often not. Women were rare in the early years, and those who came often found opportunity precisely because they were rare. Some made fortunes running boarding houses, laundries, or restaurants. The men would pay premium prices for a home-cooked meal or clean clothes. Some women became prostitutes, an extremely dangerous profession in the goldfields, but one that could be more lucrative than mining. And then there's the racism. The gold rush brought together people from all over the world, and the resulting conflicts were brutal. Chinese immigrants arrived in large numbers, fleeing poverty and war at home. They were hard-working and often successful miners. This made them targets. White miners resented their success and passed laws specifically targeting Chinese miners. The Foreign Miners' Tax of 1850 required non-citizens to pay exorbitant monthly fees for the right to mine. Violence against Chinese miners was common and rarely prosecuted. Entire Chinese mining camps were attacked and burned. Mexican and South American miners, who actually had more experience with mining than most Americans, faced similar discrimination despite having arrived in California before the Americans. Native Americans had it worst of all. The gold rush was catastrophic for California's indigenous peoples. Their lands were invaded, their water sources were poisoned by mining. They were murdered, sometimes for sport, sometimes in organized militias funded by the California government. California's Native American population dropped from about 150,000 before the gold rush to about 30,000 by 1870. It was genocide, though it was rarely called that at the time. This is the dark underside of the gold rush that doesn't make it into the romantic legends. The California dream was built on violence and dispossession. Now let's talk about who actually made money during the gold rush. Because here's the surprising truth. Very few miners got rich. A small number of people found significant gold, especially in the early years when you could still find nuggets just lying in stream beds. But most miners worked constantly and barely broke even. The cost of supplies was so high that even if you found gold, it often just covered your expenses. And luck was fickle. You might work a claim for months and find nothing, while the guy 20 feet away struck it rich. This randomness kept people hooked. It was gambling, essentially. Just one more day. Just one more spot. Just one more chance. The real fortunes were made by the people providing services to miners. Sam Brannan, the merchant we mentioned earlier, became a millionaire selling supplies. Levi Strauss arrived in San Francisco to sell canvas for tents. Miners complained that their pants kept wearing out. Strauss started making durable pants from the canvas. Later he switched to denim. He became rich selling Levi's jeans. Philip Armour opened a butcher shop selling meat to miners. He later founded Armour and Company, one of America's largest meatpacking companies. Wells Fargo was founded in 1852 to provide banking and transportation services during the gold rush. They're still around. John Studebaker made wheelbarrows for miners. He later founded the Studebaker Automobile Company. Mark Hopkins and Collis Huntington ran a hardware store in Sacramento. They later became part of the Big Four who built the Transcontinental Railroad. See the pattern? The people who got rich weren't digging for gold. They were selling shovels, or providing banking, or transportation, or food or entertainment. There's a famous saying, during a gold rush, sell picks and shovels. It's absolutely true. The people who struck it rich during the California gold rush were usually the ones serving the miners, not being miners themselves. The gambling houses and saloons made fortunes. Entertainment was scarce, and men would pay premium prices for any distraction from the grinding monotony of mining. Gambling, drinking, and prostitution were the primary industries after mining itself. The banks made money too. Gold dust was the common currency, but it was impractical for transactions. Banks would weigh your gold, give you paper credit, and charge fees for every transaction. They also financed mining operations and charged interest. So if mining was such a bad bet, why did people keep coming? Psychology. The same reason people play the lottery despite terrible odds. The dream of striking it rich is intoxicating. Every story of someone finding a big nugget kept the dream alive for thousands of others who found nothing. This is the fundamental delusion of every gold rush. The belief that you'll be the exception. That you'll be the one who strikes it rich while everyone around you fails. Most didn't strike it rich. Many went home broke. Some stayed in California and found other work. A few found modest success, and a tiny percentage actually found significant gold. But the gold rush's impact on California was permanent and profound. California's population exploded from 15,000 to 380,000 between 1848 and 1855. This population boom pushed California to statehood in 1850, skipping the usual territorial phase. It became a free state as part of the Compromise of 1850, adding to tensions that would eventually lead to the Civil War. San Francisco transformed from a village to a major city almost overnight. It became the financial and cultural center of the West Coast. Infrastructure developed rapidly to serve the mining economy. Roads were built, steamship lines were established, banks opened. The foundations of California's economy were laid during the gold rush years. Agriculture expanded to feed the miners. The Central Valley became farmland. Ranching flourished. These industries outlasted the mining boom and became permanent features of California's economy. The gold rush also accelerated the American conquest of the West. The need to connect California to the rest of the country drove the push for a transcontinental railroad. The Pony Express was created to speed mail delivery. Telegraph lines were eventually strung across the continent. Culturally, the gold rush created California's identity as a place where anyone could reinvent themselves. Where you came from didn't matter. Your social class back home didn't matter. All that mattered was ambition and luck. This was largely mythical, of course. Class, race, and gender absolutely mattered. But the myth was powerful. It attracted risk-takers, dreamers, and hustlers. It created California's distinctive culture of optimism and reinvention that persists today. By the mid-1850s, the gold rush was effectively over. The easy gold was gone. Mining had become industrialized. Individual prospectors were replaced by companies with capital and equipment. Some miners stayed and became farmers or merchants. Some moved on to new rushes in Nevada, Colorado, Montana, wherever the next strike was reported. Some went home, broke and disillusioned. Between 1848 and 1855, about $2 billion worth of gold was extracted from California, equivalent to over $60 billion today. That's a staggering amount of wealth. But it wasn't distributed evenly. A small number of people and companies captured most of it. The average miner worked hard, suffered, and came away with little or nothing. There's a postscript to this story that's worth noting. The gold rush created boom and bust thinking that still defines resource extraction economies. The expectation that you can get rich quick. The willingness to destroy the environment for short-term gain. The influx of migrants chasing opportunity. This pattern has repeated itself in oil booms, tech booms, and cryptocurrency frenzies. The California gold rush was the template for every speculative boom that followed. And here's the most important lesson. In any gold rush, the real winners aren't usually the people chasing the gold. They're the people selling to the chasers. When everyone's running in one direction, the smart money is figuring out what they'll need and selling it to them. Levi Strauss didn't mine, he sold pants. Wells Fargo didn't mine, they moved and stored gold. Sam Brannan didn't mine, he sold supplies. This principle applies far beyond gold rushes. During the dot-com boom, the real winners weren't most of the companies. It was the lawyers, landlords, and infrastructure providers. During crypto booms, it's the exchanges and platforms, not most of the traders. The California gold rush also reveals something darker about human nature. When the possibility of wealth appears, morality becomes flexible. The violence, the racism, the environmental destruction, the genocide of Native Americans. These were all justified or ignored because gold was more important. This isn't unique to the gold rush. It's a pattern that appears throughout history whenever resources and money are at stake. The California gold rush just happened to compress all of human greed, ambition, cruelty, and hope into a few intense years in one place. James Marshall, the man who discovered gold and triggered all of this, never profited from his discovery. He tried to claim ownership of the land where he found gold, but squatters and legal battles defeated him. He died poor in 1885, bitter about the fact that his discovery had made thousands of others rich, while leaving him with nothing. John Sutter, on whose land the gold was found, was similarly ruined. His workers all abandoned him to search for gold. Squatters invaded his land. He spent the rest of his life in legal battles, trying to recover his property. He also died poor. The irony is perfect. The two men most directly responsible for the gold rush were destroyed by it. Meanwhile, the merchants, the bankers, the saloon owners, the suppliers, they thrived. The California gold rush lasted only about 7 years in its most intense phase, but it fundamentally changed California, America, and the world. It demonstrated that mass migrations could happen almost instantly when the right incentive appeared. It proved that lawless frontiers could organize themselves, however imperfectly and violently. It showed that environmental destruction could happen at an industrial scale. And it revealed that the promise of wealth could make people do almost anything. The gold rush also created lasting mythology. The image of the rugged individual striking it rich through hard work and luck became central to American identity. Never mind that it wasn't really true for most people. The myth was more powerful than the reality. Today you can visit the sites of gold rush camps. Most are gone completely, reclaimed by nature or paved over. Some are ghost towns, preserved as tourist attractions. A few became permanent settlements that grew into modern towns. The environmental scars remain. The hydraulic mining sites look post-apocalyptic. Rivers still run discolored from sediment. Mercury contamination persists in some areas. And in museums, you can see the gold itself, the nuggets, the dust, the jewelry made from California gold. It's beautiful, certainly. But it's hard to look at it without thinking about what it cost. Thousands of lives lost in the journey to California. Thousands more lost to disease, violence, and accidents in the goldfields. An entire indigenous population decimated. An environment ravaged, all for a soft yellow metal that we decided was valuable. Was it worth it? That's not a question with an easy answer. California became a state. Infrastructure was built. Fortunes were made. But the human and environmental cost was enormous. Perhaps the better question is, would it happen again? And the answer, clearly, is yes. It happens all the time. Every tech boom is a gold rush. Every cryptocurrency frenzy is a gold rush. Every housing bubble is a gold rush. The specific object of desire changes, but the psychology remains the same. People will always chase the dream of instant wealth. They'll always convince themselves that they'll be the ones who strike it rich. They'll always ignore the evidence that most people fail. And there will always be someone smart enough to sell them the picks and shovels. The California gold rush didn't end in 1855. It just moved. The next one is always beginning somewhere. The dream of gold, or its modern equivalent, never dies. It just finds new prospectors and new places to dig. And most of them, like the 49ers before them, will come away with nothing but stories and regrets. But a few will strike it rich, and their stories will inspire the next rush. That's the cycle. That's the pattern. That's the lesson of the California gold rush. The gold itself was never really the point. It was the dream of gold that mattered. And dreams, unlike gold, are infinite.